So welcome to PocketGamer.biz's RoundTable. So we have one of these every month covering various different subjects. So I hope you are looking out for those. They provide an opportunity to really get stuck into a particular topic about mobile games and also ask questions of the expert panelists that we have. And we have some expert panelists certainly today. So I should say, obviously, we have also our Q&A box, which you should have access to via Zoom. So as questions arise, please jot them down in the Q&A box, and I will kind of drop them into the conversation as and when is appropriate. So let's give our formal title. Make sure I get it right. So we have the formal title is Design and Implementation of Security and Protection Measures in Mobile Games. So that's pretty wordy, but I think there's plenty of opportunity for us to kind of drill down into some of those words and kind of put together a holistic kind of view of what's going on in this space. Clearly, from a kind of headline point of view, over the years, we've had lots of talk about kind of security, mainly in kind of sort of PC games, I suppose, and it makes total sense now. Mobile games are the biggest single part of the games kind of industry, that we're kind of taking mobile games and their security and anti-hacking and this sort of stuff a lot more seriously. So that's good to see. I should point out this roundtable is in association with Denuvo at Irdeto, and they have some technology which they will be talking about, which specifically helps developers in this area. And we have other panelists as well coming at it from a different angle. So we have game developers as well, and people coming at it from a kind of player experience point of view. So hopefully we're going to kind of put together some interesting kind of opinions and get a broad view on this kind of subject matter. If people were looking for one of our panelists, Ben, unfortunately he can't make it. He's been ill, so he was going to cover kind of regulatory sort of aspects. I'm sure we can still talk about them, but he was going to be our aspect on that. So maybe we won't talk about them as in depth as we would otherwise do. But anyway, enough from me. Let's kick off with introducing our panelists, or I will get them to introduce themselves at least, because that's they know more than me about themselves as much as anything else. So panelists, if you can just kind of give me kind of tell me kind of who you are and who you work for, and briefly the sort of stuff you do, and then maybe some sort of headline statement about why you think this kind of stuff is important, or what trends you see, and then we'll kind of take it from there. Steve, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, thanks, JJ. So I'm Steve Huin, and I am the CMO at Denuvo and Irdeto. And Denuvo is basically the world leader in games protection and anti-piracy technologies. So really, our focus is helping game publishers to monetize their assets, and that's why we're here today, is to talk exactly about that.
Lovely, thanks, Steve. Chris.
Hello, yeah, so my name is Chris Winn, and I'm a senior game designer working at Mediatonic. At Mediatonic, I work on Yahtzee with Buddies, which is a social, casual, free-to-play mobile game based around, Yahtzee and rolling dice and stuff. Prior to that, I worked at King, and prior to that, I worked at Outplay Entertainment. So my entire career has been in mobile, casual, and free-to-play. And I suppose anti-tamper is particularly interesting from a mobile free-to-play perspective, because regardless of the title that you're creating, if it's single-player, multiplayer, or anywhere on that spectrum, the second that you are expecting to monetize from that experience, anti-tamper becomes super important. You can't allow bad actors to undermine the way that you're planning on constructing your whole business model. So I kind of view it as a boilerplate requirement in the same way as any other base fundamentals of the game development would be. And I suppose that's why I'm here. Good, I guess.
Yeah. always like the term bad actor. I always kind of assume this kind of terrible Shakespearean person who's been kind of hacking up. Right, okay, moving on. Christian, can you introduce yourselves?
I am Christian Koidl. I am leading the development of the mobile protection solution at Denuvo, and therefore my interest is in protecting all kinds of mobile application, and for most mobile games.
Oh, good. Who have we got next? Renee.
Hi, my name is Renee Gittins. I'm the Executive Director of the International Game Developers Association, and it is our mission to support and empower game developers in achieving fulfilling and sustainable careers. And part of that is ensuring that developers are able to make proper profits from the games that they create, both by ensuring the security of their released titles, but also the integrity of player experience. Because if players in multiplayer games are having a bad experience due to cheating and other negative experiences, then they're unlikely to support the studio to the same extent that they would otherwise. My background is both in technology and creative direction, and I've actually previously been a server developer on the back end of competitive mobile games.
You're going to get lots of questions. You're covering all the bases there. That's good. Thanks. And Pascal.
Yes, hi. So my name is Pascal. I'm a player experience consultant, currently working at Hatch Entertainment, but also I have the PX Hub, which is a platform for content on player experience, through which I actually help developers see how they can build more sustainable games. And obviously one of those topics, or multiple of those topics, like fairness, security, and safety for players is a big thing. So yeah, I mean, it reaches with what I do, so that is why I'm here.
Good. So it's interesting. We've some kind of phrases, some terms have been thrown around, which is good, which kind of gives us a setting. A few of you mentioned player experience, and as we've got kind of Pascal up now, we'll stick with you as the kind of our player experience expert. I'm sure other people have views as well, but how does it? I mean, I guess player experience for me often, is like kind of how much you enjoy a game, which is, I guess, sort of a positive sort of kind of experience. How much do I enjoy this compared to this other game, sort of thing. But I guess in this kind of format, we're thinking of there's a negative experience, which could be there's cheating going on, or it could also be, I suppose, that I guess particularly on PC, we've seen people not like some of the technologies that have been used to try and stop anti-cheating. So can you talk a little bit around how you see player experience kind of working in, I guess there's kind of two forces going on. There's a positive one and a negative one. How do you think that plays out?
Yeah, well, obviously there is a negative aspect towards games when it is not safe or when people do not feel safe. I mean, one thing to understand is that player experience is not just like when people are interacting with your game. It's a lot more than that as well. Like, it's all about the journey that the player makes even before they actually get to your game. And I mean, in a game, for instance, where people don't feel actually safe when they're playing, it will create this kind of vibe or attitude around that game, around that community, and that will actually spread outside as well. So that is how it actually touches with people that are not yet playing your game, but could be playing your game. Mm-hmm. So companies that actually try to ensure that they have a fair and a safe playing ground for their players, it's more the positive kind of side of it. Like that will actually help. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. So yeah, kind of lost for words here at this point.
Okay, that's all right. We'll give you time to find those words. Kind of Chris, you've gone through, obviously, I imagine, lots of different kind of products of different formats. What's your kind of take on how this kind of plays out within the player experience and how that links back to the game?
Sure. I guess to specifically look at it from a mobile game design perspective, a lot of mobile titles and specifically games in sort of a mid-core space, I suppose, mid-core to core, progression is oftentimes all of the game. But especially if you're looking in like the gacha game environment, like progression is the core of the experience all the way to the whole of the experience. And if you allow for players to gain access to that progression and to cheat it in ways of, like, for example, in a gacha game, like I mentioned, being able to skew the drop rates of the high quality rewards, which potentially they're expected to get at a much later point, and you allow them to undermine that crafted progression, then it's not only going to create like a negative user experience for other players, assuming there's some light social elements in this imaginary game I've made up, but it's also going to negatively affect like the active player, in that if you've constructed an experience that's built around this long-term retention and they're capable of undermining that, then in theory they're also not going to get the best experience out of the product that you provided, right? And to build on something that Pascal was saying as well around like player experience outside of the product itself. I think it's super interesting the way that your game has cheaters, your game has cheats available, affects how people just approach a product. Like perhaps I enjoy a game and I'm playing the game every day, but I hear that it has cheaters. I hear that in like a Twitch stream, or I hear that in a YouTube video or whatever. My friends are talking about it. That means that I no longer want to play that game, because as Renee touched on earlier, like you've undermined the integrity of that whole experience. In multiplayer, obviously that integrity is very felt and pushed upon me, but even in single player experiences, like I was touching on, I think that knowing that other people are getting past your troubles much more easily and without integrity lowers your desire to engage in that product as well. So
it's really good
I
point.
potentially answered the question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's good because you've reframed it almost, and it's almost, there's the game and then the meta game, and then there's this almost like softer, external meta game as well, which is I guess community is the other term we'd use. And that one of the questions I had was going to be about kind of single player and multiplayer, but obviously that wider community is very kind of strong. And I guess the other interesting thing is probably if there's a game with lots of cheaters, that probably attracts more cheaters. So it's almost like you can almost like your cheating can actually kind of destroy your game. Okay, so let's get a bit specific now. So who got so Steve, can you talk a little bit about what Denuvo does? Because I guess your background is in PC games, so that's where a lot of the kind of focus has been. And in the last year, you've kind of moved over to mobile. So from a company point of view, why is this the time that you kind of felt that mobile needed these kind of tools?
Right. Okay. Well, look, if you look at the highest level, there's quite a few different revenue streams that can come and help fund basically the games and monetize the games. There's it starts depending on the business models with the games being sold, and that's true on PC platforms, but also on mobile. So there's an element of actually supporting the game publishers in protecting the game itself, and there's tremendous issues there where people tend to steal the games and republish them on other stores, potentially in disguise, potentially with ransomwares, with different ad networks. Ultimately, enabling people to make money off the original game and the original publisher not really being able to monetize their games, but also as we transition, I guess, more and more into the connected world, then there is indeed this additional monetization elements, including the downloadable elements and of course the multiplayer element, which need to be secured to ensure that the players remain engaged. And so Denuvo kind of covers from one end to the other. So it's really from the original revenue, if there is one, because there's a lot of free-to-play games, all the way to keeping the players engaged and making sure that the games remain fair and that the monetization happens over time.
Good, thanks. So Renee, if I guess I can get you to put on the hat of sort of overseeing kind of where the development kind of community is. Do you think this is something that kind of the mobile community takes serious enough at the moment? Is it something that is a kind of ongoing trend, or the developers very clearly understand this?
With the mobile community and understanding the risks of cheating and such like that, I think that there's a varied audience. I mean, if you look at mobile game players, even in competitive games, you see a large percentage of them being people who are not previously experienced with games or online games. So they might understand that something seems off, particularly if you have something like leaderboards, and they'll either make the assumption that those people are either spending lots of money to get advantage in that regard, or that there's something questionable going on. Now, when it comes to player versus player interactions, I think that people tend to assume cheating. It is easier to assume cheating than issues with one's own skill set, right? And I think that sometimes, particularly in the newer mobile games, when it comes to player versus player, people don't fully acknowledge that there can be issues with integrity of client information. So, it's very easy to do packet sniffing and change packets if you're, like, for example, communicating entire game states back and forth between the client and the server. And I think it's acknowledging those potential vulnerabilities and addressing them is something that everyone who has a competitive game should make sure that they're doing.
I guess with mobile, being kind of smaller teams and potentially less experienced teams than stuff on PC, that they would probably not have the expertise in house anyway, and probably not have had the experience of that being a big issue.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this brings back into light of something that we were talking about previously when it comes to player experience. I think there's always a balance in between different types of the experience. So if you have anti-cheating measures, that's great. You don't want cheaters. Cheaters are bad. But over-aggressive anti-cheating measures can affect the player experience, or might target people who aren't cheating and just happen to have a program running on their computer that you detect is potentially cheating and cause problems with your community that way. So there's definitely a balance when you're looking at these different measures to ensure that the player experience is optimal.
I love the way you say players say the game is cheating, because my kids say that all the time. Whenever they lose, the game is cheating. I'm going, well, do you mean that you lost? Yeah, okay. Right. So, Christian, can we go into a little bit of detail? Let's not go too deep kind of straight away. We've got plenty of time. But how does the kind of anti-tamper kind of product work? What kind of things, is it stopping, and what kind of things isn't it stopping? Can we take that as a first point?
So from a development studio point of view, how our protection looks like is that it is at the very end of the development process. You just invoke our tool, or you use our service, better said. So what you can do is you upload the final application, and then we add the protection onto that. You get it back, and you're good to do your final QA and release the game. So that's how it looks like from a usability point of view. But what it does is it has several, it's built around plugins. It has several plugins that can do different things, and you can choose which ones you want to have. So for example, if you choose to use integrity verification, then what we do is that we make sure that that the code is not tampered with. It's in the original form as you submitted it to the store. And the same goes for all the assets in the game. So we also make sure that no assets are changed in any way to, gain any unfair advantage, for example. And there are also a number of other plugins that we have, and they can do different things. Like, for example, make the game not playable on rooted devices. So if you choose to do this, we activate it, not playable on emulators, and a couple of other things to make reverse engineering harder, like anti-debugging, like anti-hooking features. That's just a couple of them.
So I guess as all kind of middleware and tool companies do kind of suggest, you suggested basically this is very simple. When you take your finished game and you do something at the end of the process, which I'm sure is totally right. I'm not suggesting that's the case, but obviously you're adding something in there. So mobile games, there's obviously always concerns about performance, file size, maybe network, net data traffic and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about how that kind of plays out?
Yes. So we add some code to the game, and that code also needs to be executed, of course, and this takes CPU cycles. So nothing to hide there. But what we do, and I think this is also one of our main advantages among other tools, is that we are one of our main goals is not to degrade any user experience, and this specifically we do this by not decreasing the performance of the game. And as one service that also comes with us is during the setup of our game. So there's some setup phase on our end where we do, for example, profiling of the game. So we check which functions, which part of the game are running during the gameplay and which are outside of gameplay, like some option menus or startup or wherever else. And then we only choose functions that do not have an impact on the in-game experience. In addition to that, then we also do some test run of the protection itself, and then we're playing the game for a couple of hours just to 100% make sure that during the gameplay there is no degradation at all.
So maybe it's worth reinforcing that's probably the magic that comes with Denuvo in practice. The magic comes from the 10 to 15 years of actually doing that and finding ways to secure the games without actually impacting the performance. And ultimately doing that without actually integration effort, which again sounds magic, but is ultimately what ends up happening.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks. So Chris, do you kind of have any kind of tools to see kind of what impact kind of cheating or all these kind of issues are having on your games, or is that something that you don't really kind of have any metrics around kind of formally? It's just kind of something you hear about anecdotally.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have two answers that I'm going to give. So I'll give the first one first. So one of the ways that we do notice the impact of cheaters in games is through our business performance and analytics teams. Obviously, if you're running a mobile game, especially a large mobile game, and it's expected to have like a long life cycle and be live operable, if that's a real word, then there's a huge amount of data management and analytics that comes alongside that. You're constantly checking the difficulty curves, where the players are hitting the progression points that you're expecting in the timescales that you expect, checking that the economy is balanced with the right sinks and taps, etc. And one thing that those analytics teams are always having to do is to distill potentially fraudulent players who aren't engaging in the game we expect, who are using tamper techniques. We have to distill those users out of that data so that we actually get a proper read of the way, out of the way that players are actually engaging with our games. So I suppose the more you can build these anti-tamper techniques early on in the process, the more you're going to save time in those analytics conversations, and the more you're going to be able to ensure that the data that you're handling is accurate and representative of the experience that your users are having, which is just going to help you to make better and better, more data-informed decisions. The other thing that I was going to talk about in terms of impact of cheaters was from more of a roadmap and developmental and production perspective. Obviously, every time that you decide that you're going to place anti-cheat techniques into your product, that is time that those developers are going to have to spend not being able to work on something else. To like take a super distilled down perspective on this, by putting anti-cheat software in, you're choosing not to include another level or a clan system or being able to play with friends or whatever. And that means that anything that you can do to simplify that implementation process, whether that's through the use of third-party tools, for example, is something that's going to help you actually build those features that increase the reach of your game in from the get-go. You know, those conversations are often very difficult until they're not, right? It's like, do we need anti-cheat? It's like, well, maybe we should get all this other stuff that's going to make our game a success, and then your game is a success, and suddenly you really wish you had anti-tamper, you know? So you're kind of in a catch-22 there as well. So any ways to simplify that is also super important.
Cool. Sorry, can you just you mentioned camper techniques? Can you just maybe, I don't know what those are. So
I meant maybe I did. Maybe I did. I meant to say anti-tamper or tamper.
Okay, cool. All right, good. Okay.
Right. I can make up a definition though.
Sorry, it's my ears need to read. Okay, Steve, do you want to jump in and say something there?
Just maybe to add a bit of data, because what we did before joining or jumping into the anti-cheat arena, if you will, we did a major survey. I think we surveyed over 10,000 gamers worldwide. Don't quote me on this, but it was significant amount of gamers. The report is available somewhere on the web. But I think what the data that's really interesting is that over 77% of the gamers were really put off when they would feel like there would be cheaters within their environment on online games. And 46% of them were basically making the clear statement that they were not willing to spend more money within the game if they felt that they were being cheated. So there is a direct impact into the spend of people when they start feeling like they're being cheated.
Yeah, I guess it's going back into the ideas of the integrity of the community, and I guess if things are free to play, the most important thing is keeping the community in the game for as long as possible, and having fun so they can monetize them, and anything that kind of degrades that is actually, you know, a fairly important factor. Pascal, I don't know if you've come back to the thought you had before, but if you haven't, I wonder from a development kind of perspective as well, a kind of similar question to Chris. Do you kind of try to monitor your games and how things like cheating are impacting their kind of performance, either from a kind of a metrics point of view or a monetization point of view?
Well, you should, right? I mean, okay. That would be a bit silly not to do it. I mean, it's like what Chris was explaining. Like you need to pay attention to your data. Like mobile games are indeed gathering way more data on player behavior than other companies actually would, I suppose. So it's more a matter of like trying to compare what is actually going on based on your quantitative and your qualitative kind of feedback from players as well. Like one being your analytics stack and what's going on there. How is the game performing? Are we seeing drops in resource usage, or is there sudden spikes in resource usage? On the other hand, there's also the sense of the community that you actually would need to pull. Like, are people talking about cheating? If they are, if there is substantial number of people talking, hey, this is not fair, this feels like there's cheaters here or something like that, there is a big likelihood that there might be something going on. If not, I mean, because it doesn't mean that it's 100% that you are having cheaters or something is going wrong there. It can also be that the perception is just quite off, like maybe a mechanic feels not fair or something like that. But yeah, I would definitely say you need to pay attention to it. Like it's indeed this catch-22. Like, do you focus on building a kind of feature that will actually ensure that your players are safe, that everything is fair, or do you go for the next big feature that you know will retain your users? But then you also have companies that are like, yeah, well, why should we care at this point? We have no reason to think that something is going on until something hits the fan. And then indeed you're at the point like, oh, now I wish that we actually had planned this in. And then, yeah, alarm bells are ringing everywhere. So it's not the nice place to be in. I think there is a lot of companies that actually fall for that. It would be good that at least when you are figuring out that you have either a very competitive kind of game, especially like we mentioned that before, especially with like competitiveness, that you try to ensure that everything can be as fair as possible. And that if there is an inkling that you're thinking this might be something that could get abused or someone could do a workaround, then at least make a plan on what you can do if things would go wrong.
Yeah. Bad reputations in the game development or in the game industry come really quickly to the audience, right? Like if your game has a reputation for lagging or for cheating or for toxicity, that spreads very quickly and will be seen as how your game is defined, even if you fix that quite quickly as well. So I think that, yeah, I completely agree that a lot of these problems should be nipped in the bud or before the bud even starts, because if you do get that bad reputation, it is going to take so much time to overcome it.
I have to say, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask a question kind of emerging out of this. Like, how do people think that you should handle PR around these sort of topics? Because if you have a large portion of your user base that are drifting away because they think there's loads of cheaters in the game and suddenly that game is full of cheaters becomes part of the rhetoric, what do you do? Because if you make a Twitter post, for example, saying, hey, we're looking to address it, then you're drawing attention to the issue. You're perpetuating that discussion. And also you're raising awareness of people who perhaps weren't aware that those tools existed. So it's another just tricky situation that you can find yourself in, especially as like your user base grows larger and larger. So I guess I'm just curious what other people's thoughts are around that. Not targeted anyone in particular, but if anyone does have any thoughts.
When it comes to PR communications, obviously it depends on your community and the state that the issues are in. But I think that saying that you're implementing new measures to ensure, no cheating, I don't think that's going to generally be seen as a negative thing. If you say, we've had tons of, cheating problems and now we're addressing them, like that's not how you want to phrase that. But if you say, hey, community, we just want to inform you of these new anti-cheating measures. This is if it will, this is how it will affect your experience. Not at all, hopefully. And this is what you should be aware of. If you have any problems with these anti-cheating measures because you use like accessibility programs in the game, please reach out to us and we'll ensure that this doesn't affect your experience. That way it sounds, nobody's going to get upset about that. But if you do have a huge problem where cheating is well known, like maybe some streamers get shown cheating and it becomes a really big topic, then I would say, yeah, you should directly address that there is cheating. But for the most part, I would just address what you're doing to prevent cheating.
Yeah, I would actually also add on that, like, communicating is of course better than not communicating, because if something like this pops up and you as a company, you're staying silent, I mean, then you're just advocating for it. Then it's just like, yeah, could just as well communicate. And in that case that, yeah, we don't care. So, I mean, you want to show that you care towards your community. So yeah, you need to communicate.
Yeah, and look, from our experience, because I'm also noticing the Q&A that's asking at the same time, when should we even worry about starting to roll out anti-cheat technologies? The answer is probably from day one, if you know that it's going to be an online multiplayer game, because there probably will be some pain generated by adding it later anyway, versus if it's clean and clear from day one. But that being said, it's really not hard, and so adding the technology, we've seen it done in the magnitude of days in moments of crisis. So it's not that hard, but it needs to be decided, and people need to want to do it, and then you have to hit it hard on the PR side at that point, right? Because otherwise you're losing control over it.
So just to be clear, Steve, that as far as I understand it, you can have like a finished game, and then you add the protection at that point. Obviously, it's always better to do it as early as possible, but you can basically have a finished game and literally before you submit to the App Store, add it then.
Yeah,
in terms of this product.
That's exactly that. In general, that's how it works. Again, it's preferable to get involved earlier, because then part of the testing cycles before that, rather than the right before the end kind of thing, because you never know what you might discover. But essentially that's pretty much it, right? The game is finished, and then we pack on technology around it without impacting its performance to guarantee that people can't temper it, and therefore steal it in case it's actually sold as a game. But also then anti-cheat technology, which is really there to ensure that it's fair and people can't apply all kinds of crazy hacks and bots and you name it, all kinds of super smart way of trying to attack the games these days.
Mm-hmm. Good, thanks, Steve. I don't know if this is kind of going back to our previous discussion about kind of communication and that sort of stuff. I don't know if these two are related, but I have noticed probably over the last year or so, particularly some of the bigger game companies putting out press releases, kind of boasting about how many accounts they've just banned. And that kind of struck me as as sort of an interesting way of dealing with it, because obviously if you just banned 1 million accounts, then that suggests you've got a lot of issues with cheating. But equally, if you've banned 1 million accounts, that suggests you're really against people cheating. So I guess it cuts both ways. And those were particularly, I think that was like a PUBG and some of those kind of really big mobile games, which are very competitive and probably are attracting a lot more attention. But I think that potentially can be an interesting way of dealing with the kind of the PR thing, because although I guess that, going back to your point, Renee, it depends whether the community then takes that as they banned loads of cheaters, let's go and see if we can kind of cheat some more sort of thing, whether that attracts people in, or whether that kind of like dampers it all down and says, if you cheat, we're going to take your account away and you're going to lose all your stuff. I mean, I guess there's no right answer to that really,
but maybe just to comment on that further, so if I look at our technology is probably ill-named anti-cheat, because it's not there to prevent it, it's there to detect it, and then every game developer is then responsible to do what they want on the data. And so some might decide they need to basically boot out the player of the game, the competitive game that's going on, up to potentially banning the players if that's what they want. But some other strategies include, for example, grouping the cheaters together, and let them play. and then the non-cheaters are then playing fair game on the other side, right? So there's plenty of strategies possible, and it doesn't have to go as far as actually banning people in practice.
Okay, good. So we're getting some good questions in now. So this one is going to be fairly technical, but I guess it's good to raise these. So Christian, you've been a bit quiet, so if you can maybe speak up a bit, get closer to the microphone, that sort of thing. Anyway, so I guess you can read it as well, but I'll read it out the question. Could you go into slightly more in depth about how you detect emulators, particularly considering the wide range of Android devices and operating systems, etc.?
Yes, so that's some challenge to keep apart all these different Android devices and the emulators. But what we are looking for emulator detection is there's some pretty well-known telltale signs. So there are certain files in there. They have maybe certain packages installed. They are having certain properties. And other things is that always the emulator needs to communicate from the emulated guest to the host. So we're also looking for traces. So where are these communication channels? To just name a few of the techniques we use there.
Okay. So if that didn't answer the question, please ask a more detailed question. Thanks for that, Christian. Okay, so I wonder, there was a question we were going to talk to with Ben, who couldn't make it, but I think it's worth kind of raising. And we've mentioned a lot about particularly kind of competitive games, and I guess there's a broad trend happening in mobile games that all mobile games are becoming more competitive. Obviously, different features, because that's a good way of retaining and monetizing. And I guess on the broader, on the kind of like the bigger sense, we're seeing the rise of things like esports and even things like kind of real money competitive play with platforms like Skills and things like that. I mean, this is a more general question, I guess, than this particular subject. But let's start with you, Chris. I mean, do you think now that pretty much all games do have to be competitive, and it kind of, a version of esports is kind of where all games are going, in the sense of esports being something that a game that more people will kind of watch than people will play? I mean, is that something that really is playing into where you think mobile games are going in future?
Sure. That's an interesting question. I guess I wouldn't specifically call out esports as the direction that mobile games are going to move into, especially not by necessity, though I recognize that obviously it's a huge area of the industry. I would call out that social is an increasingly necessary area, especially for larger mobile games to move into. And that's a huge part of that is just because the cost to acquire users is just going up and up over time, especially with the current pandemic going on. Obviously, that's also increased the cost to acquire users, and that just means that finding ways to improve virality, increase that K factor within your products is going to become more and more important. And one of the easiest and simplest and most reliable ways to do that is just through those core social fixtures. And when we talk about social, that's a sliding spectrum, sliding scale. I mixed two metaphors there. That's a sliding scale. You've got direct real-time PvP on one end, which we've discussed quite a little bit. On the opposite end of that, you've got lighter social elements, including just basic clans systems and other ways of grouping users together to allow them to cooperate or compete cooperate together. You can do all sorts of different approaches to that, but that's still a social interaction, which is going to improve the KPIs of your product and help you retain your users over the long term, and opens another avenue for bad actors to ruin the experience for other players. And then even if you're not doing anything like that, you've got things like bot games, right? It is not uncommon for you to present player-to-player interaction when in fact it is just ghosts and bot data. And if you are going to make use of that sort of structure, which there's plenty of sensible reasons to do so, then that's just another reason that you need to make sure that you're preserving that integrity. And on top of that, I guess, increasing emphasis, especially in mobile casual and I guess generally in the mobile market, of community events. Just social features are becoming more and more penetrative, whether those are light social or built social from the ground up, and anti-tamper is going to be important for all of those. I find it difficult to imagine a top of the charts mobile title at this point that doesn't contain some sort of social feature. Someone can point out the one that is achieving that and I'll look silly, but I think it's a reasonably safe comment for me to make. But I guess it'd be good for someone to talk if they do have more specific information about the esports angle, because I think that is like totally super important. Just not something I have a huge amount of experience with.
Pascal or Renee, you got anything particularly you want to say about esports or?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that esports is going to make the world go round in gaming, really, right? With the advent of streaming, we've seen that people are showing more and more interest in watching games be played, whether that is in a competitive manner or simply just enjoying watching a personality go through a single player game. Esports has become more and more popular, and we are seeing it more on mobile these days and being seen as a more significant aspect of mobile, like true competitive esports on mobile games. I think that we'll continue to see that, especially as mobile titles continue to develop and become more in-depth, have more of that very active PvP kind of situations. You know, we're seeing MOBAs on mobile. Of course, games like Fortnite also have mobile versions. You know, Wizards of the Coast is coming out with a mobile version of Magic Arena. So I think that the next generation uses their phones to play games just as much as they use their consoles or computers. And we will see the growth of esports. And with that growth of esports, integrity of that competition is extremely important on those platforms.
I guess we can call out there as well that like the Western market specifically is actually probably behind the trend in that environment. Like when we're talking about mobile esports, like we already see the impact that Arena of Valor, for example, is having in like an Eastern market, or Mobile Legends Bang Bang, which has seen some success in both markets. Or if you start to look in Middle Eastern territories and you see more like the management sort of thing, which is less esports, but still has some of that sort of sentiment around it. So yeah, just another interesting aspect as well.
And I guess what's interesting to play into that is because as esports kind of goes, obviously not having big esports in arenas probably for a while now. So that's another kind of force onto mobile. And as the amount of money behind winning esports, increases, that's kind of a direct monetization, which obviously is a direct incentive for people to try and cheat to get further up the leaderboard to get the big prizes. I mean, I wonder if at some point, maybe kind of just an observation, you end up kind of having people having to create specific specific game types for kind of esport tournaments to try and make them kind of more tough against things like anti-cheating, because there's so much at stake. Anyone got any views on that possibility? No one's sure. Okay. I'll move on. Pascal, you've not said anything on the kind of the esport competitive kind of side.
No,
how do you see it from the Hutch point of view or from the user experience point of view?
Well, I would have to agree with what Renee was actually saying, that esports is going to grow. It's going to keep growing. I mean, it's not only on mobile, and we're already seeing the effects of the possibility of cheating on what it does with the industry. I mean, we had when was it, a few months ago, we had actually one esports athlete getting banned because he was actually posting a video online where he actually was using a hack or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, the expectations of the audience is also something that we need to take into consideration here. Like if people who are watching football or soccer or cycling, if they know that one of the athletes over there is actually cheating by using doping or something like that, then of course it's going to have repercussions on the brand, on the team, on the sport itself. So I think esports itself is also not going to take that. I think they're going to crush down on that as well. Like what you brought up, maybe specific kind of clients only to be used for esports tournaments. I don't think it's too futuristic thinking or something like that. I think it might very well be within the possibilities, but that would also only be if cheating would be so rampant in that case. So I guess it depends as well on how the developers of esports titles would actually look at that. Most likely I would bet that they actually would say okay, no, this is not going to happen. We're going to try to ensure that this is not possible, but never say never, right?
Something
might slip.
because as you point out there, when when it comes to kind of physical sports, we might think of something like the Tour de France that for I guess 20 for the last 20 years has been kind of rightly bedeviled with people doping and all the records being rewritten, and now still cycling is still seen as something that really hasn't kind of overcome that or maybe only in recent years, and I guess when there is kind of real money and real prestige involved, which is kind of where esports takes us, is and it goes back to the integrity thing. It's not necessarily that people are cheating, but if it's seen as people are assumed to be cheating and winning, so it's almost like it's an interesting thing that I didn't think would come out of this discussion, but obviously people actually cheating is very bad for your games, but the perception of people cheating is in some ways kind of more insidious and worse. It's almost people should be maybe talking a bit more about we are using these anti-cheating mechanics as almost like a Nintendo approval stamp. We're using this anti-cheat mechanic to stop people cheating. It's almost I don't know. I'm getting a bit carried away now.
Right. You're right. It's also a deterrent in a way. That's also kind of telling people that this is not the game to be reckoned with, and instead people move on to the next one.
So let's have a look. Getting a few more questions. So one, I guess we've kind of discussed it, but as we got you up, Steve or Christian can jump in if you want. So we've spoke a bit about impacting performance. Do you want to maybe reiterate how the software works in terms of performance of the game on the device?
What we make sure is that all the performance impact that happens is not happening during gameplay. So meaning if there would know some competitive game where it is important to don't have any lags or any other problems really during the gameplay. This is actually what we are looking for, to keep all of this performance out of this phase of the game. So it's just happening where it doesn't really matter that much if you lose a couple of milliseconds, because if you're, I don't know, in between changing levels or rounds or whatever, things like this.
So I was tempted to do a voiceover this one.
Go on, Ed.
But sorry, Christian, you were breaking out a little bit with your mic. But so just to reiterate the basics, so the technology is designed around profiling technology, which is basically understanding the game before the technology is then applied at the right point, such that the game is not slowed down. So the whole magic is that it's not slowing down the game, both with anti-temper technology and anti-cheat. So that's by design the case, and anybody that's worried and interested can easily compare the two. And usually the game developers can't find a single difference between the two.
So let's pick up this point, which kind of rehashes some of the stuff we've been talking about, which is anti-cheat tools and have a bad reputation. I guess this is more kind of anti-piracy in the past. But how can developers, if we think in future, there's going to be maybe people will be a bit more public about using these sort of tools, even in mobile, and that in the past in PC games has sort of caused problems with, I guess, going back to player experience. Some people having problems with like DRM solutions. Either they don't like them philosophically, or they have problems accessing their content because maybe they're using something legitimate like a VPN or an emulator. How do we think developers should be dealing with that? I guess it comes back to communication. I mean, Chris, how do you see that?
So I suppose I'm going to do the absolute worst thing in the world and ask you to repeat the question. I'm so sorry. I was going to try and wing it.
Clever. Oh, touche.
I actually have some opinions on this if you want to toss it my way. Yeah. So I think that it all comes down to communication, like you were saying. The players who are concerned about DRM because of how it affects performance are going to be the ones who are most tuned into those communications about the topic, right? So I would just say, hey, we're having these anti-piracy measures. This is how it is implemented. And this will not affect your experience because they're being implemented in this manner, or it's being implemented in this way. Ensure that your computer or phone or whatever meets these minimum specifications to ensure a seamless player experience. As long as you talk about what that experience is going to be like and your approach to it, you're going to address the issues of those players who are going to be most concerned about that. And truthfully, the vast majority of players aren't that tuned in. They're not going to care. But those ones who are the most vocal and who do care are the ones who are also going to be the ones who are listening to your tweets or press releases or whatever the statements you're going to be making on that front.
That's very good. I mean, it seems like a lot of this is taking this as an opportunity to sort of kind of deepen the relationship with the community and take the community, make the community understand a little bit more about kind of what it is to build games. Often the community seems to think games like appear magically from the stalk delivers them and doesn't see people behind it.
I think that's actually a really interesting aspect of games is most times, like if you're buying some product or even some entertainment, a board game, perhaps not modern board games, the communities aren't really expecting communication about it. But with video games, the communities these days highly, highly expect communication. And if you don't have a PR team that is consistently communicating with your community, they see that as a negative, and you'll be constantly called out on Twitter and Reddit and everywhere else, which is not something that most industries experience, right? Like movie creators, TV show producers don't have to deal with that nearly to the same extent as video game developers. I think it's a problem that is almost unique to our industry. At least the expectations are at a higher bar than pretty much anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. And particularly for a product you're giving away for free. So, cool. I mean, Steve, do you think at some point Denuvo becomes a consumer brand? I'm sure the answer is no, but can you kind of imagine that it's seen as when we're talking about kind of the seal of approval, not necessarily, not just your product, but in general, you could argue, why GPUs consumer brands? They all,
No, I think that's the hope, right? So, and I think we really have to differentiate a little bit the two technologies being anti-tamper and anti-cheat, because anti-tamper is there like a DRM to make sure that you pay for the game that you're basically getting. And that again assumes that it's paid for. So that is indeed has been traditionally associated with a heavy-ish kind of picture. But anti-cheat is really there to help the players. It's really to reinforce a safe environment where people actually don't lose because somebody is cheating on the other side. So the Denuvo brand actually has been improving drastically with the players as we've been launching and focusing on helping the players, right? Rather than just supporting the business model of the game publishers, but trying to be at the intersection where we're helping everybody ultimately.
Cool. We've got a question about geo kind of locations and things like that. Maybe I'll make it a bit more specific. I mean, Chris, we'll try this question with you. So are there particular geographies you kind of worry about from this kind of perspective? And would you ever kind of release specific versions or like kind of hardened versions for specific areas, or is that just like a total ridiculous suggestion? Just confuses everything. You're muted, by the way.
It's all falling apart. So to answer that question, one of the things that we already do is region-specific releases of games, whether that's through whether that's new features or soft launches, obviously within specific regions. And I don't think it's unreasonable, especially within larger companies that have the resources available, to think that you could release a feature in a specific region to see what the impact from like a Tampa perspective would be. I think that's something that realistically could be done. I haven't seen it done, but considering we already do those style of releases to measure the impact of the response to our economies, that doesn't seem like an unrealistic expectation. I would also answer that, like, in terms of specific geos where it is more or less prone to tampering and piracy, I think that is almost certainly the case. Like, there is an understanding that there are certain regions where specific platforms are more popular. Obviously, there are specific platforms where this sort of piracy is easier to do. And in the same way that we in the industry like structure specific geos around like their propensity to spend and the amount that they mimic the player behaviors of tier 1 countries. Like, for example, I know that I think it's Australia that is like a cheaper geo to release in, but is well known for mimicking the behaviors of tier 1 countries, for example. Like, we release in those sort of zones to see how things are going to be released. You could definitely do the same with a more Tampa heavy geos as well.
I guess
although I've not seen it done.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. In some ways, I think that there are sort of different, obviously kind of legally as well as culturally, there probably are different attitudes to copyright anyway. So that the fact that we might see in the UK or the EU as being a copyright is this kind of pristine thing. It's just not how different cultures kind of operate. So it's not necessarily that they're being very evil and trying to destroy our game. It's just not how they approach this sort of stuff. Pascal, anything to say on different geographies, different audiences, cultures? You're muted again. Oh, you?
Yeah, I saw it just in time. Yeah, after 1 year, you would think that you wouldn't be muted in a conference call anymore. Yeah, I would actually say that there is indeed differences. Like, it's maybe more of a culture kind of thing rather than anything else, I suppose, or how game communities or the culture of particular game communities have evolved over time. Like, without naming any geolocations right now,
you've all been very politically correct.
I think you definitely can say that there would be certain communities that are more seeing the relationship between developer and player as a against kind of feeling. Not in a sense of like I'm going to come break your game or something like that, but when a game is made, it's obviously it's a framework, and somehow certain players tend to prefer to try to bend the rules a little bit or try to touch the walls of the framework in order to see how far they actually could go, which is predominant in certain gaming communities. In other also from experience in other communities, you actually have people who are very open about it. They tend to boast as well about how they can crack this or cheat in that particular kind of game because it tends to give them status or something like that, which is something that it's I wouldn't say it's the majority of gamers, and definitely not in those particular kind of gaming communities. It's more a minority, I would have to say. So
it's something to be aware of, I guess.
Yes,
most developers are fairly aware of, I guess, of that sort of stuff. Good. So we're coming up to time. I don't want to go over time particularly. I don't think there's any more questions. We had a good set of questions. I hope we have answered them all specifically. If not, please let us know. And I guess to kind of finish up, if we kind of go around the panelists and where do you think this sort of stuff is going? Is this kind of a year which mobile developers have to take this kind of very very much more seriously, or is it just kind of a broader trend that will kind of happen over time? Any other kind of points you want to raise? Renee, do you want to kind of kick us off with that?
Yeah, I think that with the expansion of competitive and mobile games and online gaming in general, that ensuring the integrity of those player experiences is really important, as well as the quality of those players' experiences. And while a lot of this can be implemented at the very end with every aspect of game development, if you consider it from day one, it's going to make the process a lot easier, a lot more seamless, and keep that player experience as enjoyable as it can be.
Good. We've got integrity in there, so that's a thumbs up. Chris, how do you say?
I guess to summarize some of the points I made earlier, like social, and whether that's extreme or light social is becoming more and more important. As social escalates, like the need for integrity, buzzword, also increases, and that means that it's going to become a larger and larger consideration, regardless of the size of the team that you're working with. And obviously, the issue I mentioned earlier about deciding on what you're going to put in your roadmap is a larger issue for smaller developers. So finding ways to simplify that work is going to become more and more important.
Cool. Steve?
Yeah, look, I'd reinforce a bit what Renee said. I think it's something to be considered from day one. I think it's gonna be responsible at this point not to apply technology to prevent cheating, to prevent actually your game from being stolen. And if you want to know more, obviously you can reach out. But beyond that, just wanted to promote the Pocket Gamer Connect number 5 in February, where we'll be talking about the real cost with Ubisoft and Miniclip as well.
Okay, good. You're doing my job for me, yeah. Pocket Gamer Connect digital number 5, yeah, in February, yeah. All sign up. Christian, I think we're having a few kind of mic problems, but still, you can shout. Right then.
Yeah, I can still give it another try. And see.
That's good. No, that's perfect now.
At the very end. Yeah, so what I would have to add to this is that I think in terms of cheating, people always say it maybe gets some bigger problem or so on, but I think we already arrived there. So mobile is a really huge platform for games already, and cheaters already also found this. And that being said, I just think that we need to raise awareness that this is already happening to almost all the games, or to the majority of games, that there are cheats out there. And it's probably, as we heard throughout the talk, it's probably too late or not a good idea to care about that once the nightmares happened, but just try to get at least some basic kind of protection, or basically take care about anti-cheating and piracy protection from the launch of the game.
Yeah, good. Excellent. Thank you, Christian. And Pascal, you can conclude for us.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, the key word that we have been talking about like over and over again during this roundtable has been integrity. And I think integrity is one of those things that is going to become so important for the whole gaming industry at this point. We're already seeing it with other kind of behavior, not necessarily the cheating, but also like undesired behavior or toxicity. We have all major platforms who are cracking down right now. They're stepping up their game. We have major gaming companies that are declaring war almost on toxicity. Like it's not going to take so much time before companies are going to figure out as well that next on the line is going to be the security.
Excellent. Good. Well, I've certainly learned an awful lot, so I hope the people attending have also. Thank you very much for our panelists, for Pascal, Chris, Steve, Renee, Christian, and also Ben. I hope he gets well soon. Yeah, just to say, we do these roundtables every month at PocketGamer.biz, obviously different subjects every month. So, but if you take the opportunity to kind of ask experts about what's going on in these particular areas, I hope you find that useful. And as has been helpfully pointed out, we have a full week of conference going on in February. So definitely sign up for that because there's going to be an enormous amount of information going to be dropped there. So thanks everyone, and see you next time, I guess.